Okay, so today we're going to be building, maybe someone could get the door here. We're going to be building on that little exercise we went through towards the end of class last time. That exercise was an estimation exercise. It was actually drawn from Steve McConnell's good book on software estimation, which I have in my office, if anyone's interested. And he's pursued that estimation quiz. You know, what's the weight of a blue whale, the length of the Pacific coastline, the number of books published in the U.S. between certain dates, etc. He's pursued that with a variety of groups and collected information on sort of the pattern of frequency of correctness of the answers. And you'll recall that the quiz takers here, and yourself as an example, were asked to structure their estimate so that 90% of the time the true value should fall within the minimum to maximum range. And, you know, if that were undertaken correctly at some level, you know, so if that were achieved, you'd expect roughly 90% of the time here, the true answer would fall within those ranges. But in your group and in groups who have taken this quiz worldwide, you'll see a very different pattern. And the answers that we got last time fall right into this pattern, where most people get typically between 1 to 3 answers correct. So they are providing these range estimates, min and max, but the range is off, but more to the point, it's too small a range, right? By making the range larger, having a really large difference between min and max, that should cover the true value. But instead, what you see is ranges that are off, but they're off in large part because they're too small, right? So the large majority of people get one, 2, or 3 of the 10 correct. So they are using ranges that are overly narrow. They are both off in their estimate and overly confident about their estimate, in the sense that they think they have a better sense of its possible values, possible range of values. It couldn't possibly be more than this, or couldn't possibly be less than that. Something along those lines that are too far. So estimation, today's lecture is going to make some points about estimation. And depending how far we get, I don't want to spend more than today's lecture on it. We may be talking some about some quantitative methods for doing this estimation that you could use in your projects or others can use in theirs. And we'll introduce some of those methods. But actually the most important thing that I want to carry away from this lecture is some set of high-level points. And many of them, not all, but many of them are listed here. And I'm going to start by mentioning them. And I may come back to this slide at the end. So there's a couple of big messages about estimation. Estimation consists of trying to come up with some approximation, some estimate, some report, anticipated report of how long it might take you to undertake a task. In today's day and age, where much of work goes on in an agile development fashions, the scope of work you might be talking about might be a couple weeks long, for example. In more traditional firms, or in earlier times, often what you might be estimating would take months. But whether it's short or long, we're dangerously poor at coming up with these estimates. We can really easily fool ourselves. We're overly optimistic about our answer. We tend to underestimate how long it will take, and we tend to be too confident as well. Too confident about the answers that we give. We have a sense of uncertainty, but it's way too narrow. Or actually, much more prone to being off than we'd like to believe. And maybe very importantly here, particularly because of over-optimism, we're inaccurate in a way that's not just kind of statistically random. We're inaccurate in a way that's systematically dangerous. Dangerous in the sense that clients will tend to be bitterly disappointed more because of the ways we tend to estimate things than if we were just had random error associated with our estimates. Okay. Second point that we'll get to is we want to distinguish between giving a target date, a guess date, that's just some uninformed guess, and an actual estimate that has some basis for it. An estimate that has some principled sort of way of having thought through the issues, particularly a thought in concrete detail about what's needed. And I want to emphasize here that when we estimate a task, it's extremely easy to fool ourselves if we're just thinking in fuzzy terms about the task. So if I gave you a description of some tasks for your projects and asked you to give me an estimate for it, it's easy to give a guess if you're just thinking in vague terms about what it is. You pull something out of the air and it's hard to critique, but it's hard to know how much emphasis to put into it. The way that good estimators approach this issue, the way that firms here in town will often approach it, is through a process called decomposition. And it's a fancy term, but basically it means breaking that task down into pieces, thinking in concrete terms, and I emphasize that, very concrete terms about each of those pieces that are required. And from those the estimates for the concrete pieces you arrive at, not directly, but in a certain way, you arrive at an estimate for the whole task. Okay? And the deal is that, and I know this from my experience as a professional software developer, if I'm just thinking about a task as a whole, kind of undifferentiated whole, I'm going to often be way off in my estimate. But if I think about each step of that task and how long that's likely to take, I'll tend to get much better estimates. Okay? So the pieces are key here, taking apart those pieces. Okay. And so that's the distinction between giving a guess, some undifferentiated way, and an estimate. It's actually thinking of very concrete terms. Estimates, ladies and gentlemen, in software projects should be made by a technical team. Now, that may sound obvious, maybe so much so it's not even worth emphasizing. But the point of the fact is that in many companies, the estimates are actually not made up by the technical team themselves. They are created by managers of technical teams. Now, managers have a very important place to play, a role to play, I mean, in terms of coordination and facilitation and so on. But if you're trying to figure out how long a task will take, a manager is far less able to have the requisite knowledge than the technical team. And often for a manager, what they will come up with for an estimate is a very optimistic thing that will suit the schedule of their bosses. So they'll come up with a target or a guess that is politically favorable in the sense that it makes them look good to their bosses and so on. And then it's the technical team that's left holding the bag when that can't be delivered on. Okay? So estimates, for sake of ownership and the sake of thinking through these pieces and how long they'll take, those estimates should be made by the technical team, not by a manager, not by someone who's not technical and doesn't have an understanding of the technical sort of issues and trade-offs and uncertainties. And along those lines, you have to resist pressure to set estimates optimistically. part of the challenge of estimating is that we're not only bad at doing it, not only over-optimistic and too confident about our answer, we get pressures from above to make it smaller. Why do people pressure us to make our estimate smaller? Tell me. What's a reason that our managers might want the estimate to be smaller? Might be disappointed if it's too long.
Well, they don't want it to be too long.
Yeah, so they don't want it to be too long because of
Costs.
yeah, costs. Costs are a lot of it. They'd like to get the revenues in sooner, right? Begin selling the product, selling the service. Get it to market sooner. Upstage the competition, right? They want to hit the market sooner, and so they'd like to be able to hear that it can be done sooner. Now, in some cases, this is mission critical. Like if you're developing software for the Vancouver Olympics, this was the case a few years ago. You either finish it on time, or it basically offers almost no value. If it's not delivered in time, there's a massive amount of waste that's been undertaken. And then each year, there's many instances like this. The most obvious ones being seasonal things. You try to hit the Christmas season market so you can sell product for consumer electronics. And what that means is getting it to market, by it'll differ for different types of items, but it might be for early in the fall or something. So it can be purchased in time for Christmas, and you get that big bump of sort of sales as a result. The point is that often those at higher levels of the company have cherished hopes about being able to secure good revenue from this. And if you're saying it won't be available till late in the fall or early the next year, they may be really disappointed. And so there's pressures on you as a technical team, and as a manager of a technical team, as a lead of a team, to sort of give estimates that are smaller. And those are the estimates that are most dangerous, because they lead to the biggest fall of expectations. But one of the most important points that I want you to carry away from this lecture, a point that I would think is a high likelihood, like several of these, of being on the exam, is you don't want to give a point estimate, ladies and gentlemen. You want to give a range estimate. You want to give a range. Now, those range estimates which we gave on Tuesday were far from perfect. As you saw, they were over-optimistic, perhaps, but certainly too confident about our answer. But range estimates communicate something extremely important that's not carried in a point estimate, not carried in if you just give one number. What is that thing that's in a range estimate that's not in a point estimate? If you just give one number, what are you not communicating to the powers that be that a range estimate does help communicate?
Your confidence.
Yeah, your confidence, your uncertainty, or degree of certainty about that answer. And it turns out that that's key. Okay. So why do we do estimates? Well, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, one thing is that, look, even in a sprint type context where we're doing agile development, you want to figure out, I mean, is this type of work, is it small enough to fit into this sprint, right? Can we do this? Is it feasible to do this work within one sprint, or do we need several sprints? So when you're trying to scope, what are we going to do within the sprint? It's really useful to be able to have an estimate for how long something might take. To assess the level of risk involved in a project up front, getting some idea of sort of how long it's going to take can be very valuable. And planning successive sort of rollout of a set of items, it's really valuable to be able to have estimates to sort of guide you. So I'd like to, with an idea towards this distinction, guesses, targets, and estimates, I want to distinguish these. So a target here. So a guess I would characterize as kind of a not particularly grounded estimate. It's sort of an off-the-cuff, estimate. By contrast, an estimate is best defined, I think, as and certainly this is draws on other thinking in the literature as an honest, realistic assessment of how many resources are required to secure some objective. So to deliver X. What are you going to need, particularly time-wise for software? Dollars often follow from it. Often they follow from time. Dollars in software come from people especially. Software engineers are expensive. You're going to draw good salaries. License costs, some costs for hardware, certainly space costs, etc., costs for working space, etc. But here we're going to focus on time. Okay, so an estimate is a grounded assessment of how many resources it will require to secure some objective, to accomplish something. By contrast, a target describes a sort of goal. That's something we'll be shooting for. We'd like to make it. It's kind of an aspirational goal. It'd be kind of nice if we could finish it, in this time. Estimate is probably how long we think it's likely to actually take realistically. But target, sometimes you shoot for something sooner, get people's sort of motivation up. We'll try to pull for this. But you're not surprised if an estimate is missed. Sometimes targets are given, sometimes they're chosen. What you don't want to do is mistake it for an estimate. This is something we try for. It's something we'd like to be able to make. You don't want a manager to say, oh, so you're shooting to have this done in the next month? Great, I'll let people know it'll be delivered in the next month. It's not a good situation, okay? Setting themselves up for a fall. Setting themselves up to be disappointed in terms of their expectations. And then finally, there's a plan, which is kind of a recipe for how we're actually going to go about achieving this. Okay, so a couple key considerations. I mentioned before, we're very poor at estimating, particularly for larger and less concretely described pieces of work. There's very crude ways of characterizing estimates that you're not really thinking through carefully. Sometimes they're being characterized as being pulled out of a hat. Sometimes it's not a hat. But here, the point is that if we just conceive of something in a sort of whole cloth, we're not really thinking through its pieces, it's easy to fool ourselves. We have strong optimistic biases, and early estimates given early in a project are often used to judge the project's success. And a key issue will be by whom the estimation is given. And a key issue here is don't allow pressure to change estimates. There's a bad phenomenon in many companies where a manager will say, a higher up manager will say, okay, I'm really excited about this project you're working on. When will it be ready? And someone will say, well, we're shooting for December, but it is possible that we'll get it done as early as September. And the manager will say, well, okay, great, I'll put it down as September. So it's good to hear you might be able to get it out in time for the Christmas season. And again, there's a lot of pressure here on sort of targets becoming estimates. So it's a big issue. So when you see those statistics about high numbers of failures in software projects, and there are quite a few, there's a long literature of cases of software projects gone bad, you have to realize that a lot of the criteria for judging failure is an unfair criteria. It's, did you live up to these politically imposed estimates, which were forced down on you or taken out of your mouth as targets and and then turned into estimates on you. So you have to be careful when saying, well, the project failed. Well, it failed because the expectations were totally at odds about what the technical people thought was needed, but no one really consulted with them effectively, okay? So you want to avoid targets becoming estimates. You want to avoid estimates being turned into commitments that, come hell or high water, we're going to deliver by that time. An estimate is an honest, realistic assessment as to how long this will require. It shouldn't be a commitment that we will deliver it, by this time. And this is a political sphere. There are often people in the company from higher up whose reputation and hopes for advancement in their careers are riding on success of your project. They've hitched their wagon to this horse, to your horse, and they are looking for success in their career with the success of this project. And they are hoping to make themselves look good by by giving favorable estimates early on and then delivering them. So it's a political thing. Often these projects have political dimensions. And we as software engineers have an obligation here. We have a responsibility to sometimes speak truth to those in power. The problem is that we tend not to be trained to do this effectively. So Tom DeMarco, and this is a quote from Steve McConnell's book, commented that operationally, the common definition of estimate, the one that's in fact used in all too many places, is the most optimistic prediction that has a non-zero probability of coming true. Okay? And he said, accepting this definition leads irrevocably towards a method called what's the earliest date by which you can't prove you won't be finished. Okay? So the idea here is, I'm going to give an estimate. I'm not going to give an estimate where I know it's impossible, but I'll give the earliest estimate where I think it's possible. And it's flattering, right? We say, oh, we think we can finish it by then. We're good, we're a great team, we're hot stuff. And you're setting yourself up for a big problem with this. And the problem is this occurs a lot. This occurs a lot in software. And part of it is it's hard with software, it's intangible. It's hard to realize how much you're fooling yourself. I've seen the numbers for your teams. It didn't surprise me. Estimates, actual. It's the same thing, right? I've seen worse. I think there was one a couple of years ago. The person estimated it would take 2 hours. It took 36 or something like that. I mean, it's just crazy. But the point is, we as software engineers, we're all subject to this. We end up wanting to. We like to think we're able to deliver it quickly, and we think of sort of the straightforward case, and we get whammed. And we'll come to why this is. So there's really three dangers of optimism that I like to separate in estimates. Three. Why is it that we're overly optimistic? Well, I view it as sort of a combination of three things. Some of it being underlying situation, putting aside psychology, it's underlying situation. Some of it is psychological, and some of it is the badness of sort of falling on one type of error, underestimation versus overestimation. So one issue is that even in the absence of anyone making an estimate, if you look at how long projects take, if you look at a distribution of how long projects take, it tends to be a distribution that has a long tail on the upper side. If you look at how long projects take, you could focus on agile or not. You have a long tail on the upper side. It goes for a long way on the upper side. No one has ever finished a project before it started. There's a limit to how long the tail can be on the left side, right? It can't be a negative length project. Why that? Yeah. But it can be a project that takes a long time. And the underlying distribution, you tend to have a skew, a sort of long tail on the upper side. You take a look at this. Take a look at this. Check it out. Target on the lower side versus actual. This is actually illustrating a somewhat different thing than I've just said. But let's check. Okay, so this is the date that they were. This is how long they were targeting to finish it in, and this is how long it actually took to complete. This is from Software Estimation by McConnell as well. Good book.
Individual projects?
These are individual projects. Each X is a project, and this is actual empirical data. Do you notice a pattern here? Tell me a salient pattern.
Nothing was below the target.
Nothing. There is no case in which the project came in less than the target. No case. There's a few that fell pretty close to the line here. But most of the projects, the actual completion took quite a bit longer than the target. That's the truth of the matter. We do have this sort of case of a long tail. But, you know, a lot of what this is a result of psychological tendencies. We don't like to think it's going to take us a really long time. We like to think, look, we're pretty good. We've learned a lot. We know this language well. We're real, hot shots at Swift. And so we like to flatter ourselves by thinking that it's going to take less time than it actually does. So we err on the side of being optimistic. Maybe we're dealing with someone who we know hopes that we'll say something smaller. And we have some uncertainty, but, it's flattering to ourselves. The person will be pleased if we mention a smaller number. But we know if we mention a larger number, they're not going to be that happy, and it will kind of make us look not so great. Say, what? Are you telling me adding 2 buttons to that form is going to take you 2 days of work? Go on. When I was in school, I could do that. I could do it in 15 minutes in the middle of class. We don't like to have to sort of deal with doubting ourselves or having them doubt our competence. So we tend to give smaller estimates. And then there's this asymmetric risk issue, which I've mentioned before, but it's worth emphasizing. If we're off by underestimating, we're overly optimistic, it has very different consequences than off by overestimating, okay? If we overestimate, in other words, if our estimate turns out to be longer than the actual time it takes, it's bad. It's bad. There's some opportunity cost to that. They could have cut over to our system earlier or what have you. They didn't have to stick with the existing, put in that extra contract for the existing system. But it's not that bad compared to if we underestimate. If we say it's going to take 6 weeks and it actually takes 6 months, this can be bad with a capital B, and in many cases a capital A and a capital T as well. There's a lot of things that can be counting on us finishing up earlier, like they're going to cut over to our system in 8 weeks' time. We're going to deliver it in 6, 2 weeks for sort of tying up the kinks, and then they're going to populate our system with data and start using it operationally within 9 weeks. And suddenly, we're saying, no, it's going to take longer, and their business processes are being distorted of our client, or our internal staff are being inconvenienced. So if we tend to underestimate, it tends to inconvenience people a lot more. People are put out, whereas if we tend to overestimate, we actually are giving overly conservative estimates, and we say, oh, we're done. Often they'll be very pleased. They'll be very pleased. Again, important point here. Suppose that it actually takes you 8 weeks. 8 weeks in any case. Takes you 8 weeks. If you promised, or if you gave, I should emphasize, if you gave an estimate that was 12 weeks, and you finish at 8, they're going to be happy. They're going to be one set of happy campers. Oh, you finished it earlier, already done, that's great. Many cases, that will be received with a lot of accolation. Same amount of time you finish it, 8 weeks. If they're counting on it in 4 weeks, and it actually takes 8, they may be pretty grumpy, those same people. Still took you 8 weeks, but the expectations were off. So it's bad in this direction. It gets a lot worse for those counting on things. Not least because people panic and trying to deliver it sometimes, and they end up not doing property quality assurance on it. You're behind, right? Behind. You estimated 4 weeks, we're behind. It's slipping, and so you end up cutting corners. You end up not doing an effective job at testing or peer review. You cut all the fat, and you end up delivering a shoddy product because you feel under such pressure. Whereas if you promise it in 12 weeks and you deliver it in 8, you're unlikely to feel that pressure to do that. So it turns out that it's one of the ironies of software and of other types of projects that early on, the decisions we make have the biggest impact on how long the project will take to completion. What requirements we're going to support, what we're not, for example. Those are decisions we'll often make earlier on, and that's going to have the biggest leverage for how long it will take. But that's when we're most uncertain about how long it will take. As time goes on, we're more and more certain about how long it will take. There's less and less still to do, and we're better and better familiar with what the issues are. But there's less and less we can do to make it come in on time. It's kind of like driving a bike down a steep hill. We could choose early on, which side we want to ride on, make some decisions. But when we're flying down that hill, we know better and better how long it's going to take us to get down, but we're less able to achieve, minute adjustments for our plans. So it is with this. If we're far out, there's not a lot we can do to rescue things. Our hands are tied. We've already committed to these technologies. We've already committed to this time expectation. We've already committed to these requirements. And there's less and less we can do. Early on, we can decide what technologies we're going to use, what requirements, who's going to do what. Late in the game, it's very hard to adjust that. But late in the game, we're more and more certain how long it's going to take. It's often a grim realization, right? We know how long it's going to take, but we can't affect it much. It's disconcerting. Okay, so what things are commonly, why are we so bad? Why this? What might we leave out of estimates? What are we not doing in terms of these targets? What are we not putting in there that we need to consider? What things are commonly omitted from estimates?
Possibility of getting stuck.
Okay, getting stuck in some way. So getting stuck, like you thought you knew how the API worked, but now you're confused how to accomplish a certain task with it, for example. Okay, so some technical difficulties. How about another thing you might leave out of an estimate? When you're thinking through how long it's going to take, when you give that best case estimate, what might you not be thinking about explicitly?
People leaving or turning over?
People, yeah, turnover and so on. Yeah, so there's a list. This is again from McConnell. Ramp up time for new team members, mentoring time for the team members, time for conversion of existing data or cut over of an existing system, supporting the build, maintaining the revision control system, integration work, defect correction work, debugging time. I mean, there's a lot of things we don't like to think about. We tend to kind of gloss over, but they take time. They take our time away from development. They take our time away from, delivery. It takes time to accomplish these things, and it's easy to omit them. Waiting for the client to get back to us with clarification of some issues, right? Not sure, do they mean this or that? We write off to them, and it takes 3 days, or maybe it takes a week because they're on vacation and we didn't anticipate that. Company context, and sometimes in this context, sick days, right? People are not available. Holidays. Oh yeah, there's this reading week. Vacations, training, etc. I mean, it's a lot of things. You didn't know someone had to go to a wedding this weekend, and they couldn't work on it. So, partly because of these, people have come up with these checklists for estimates. So what's being estimated clearly defined. You'd find that. Doesn't include all the types of work needed to complete the task. Have you really thought through the review? How long it's going to take this to go through inspection, for example? Doesn't include all the functionality areas needed to complete the task. Are you forgetting about the changes to the menu that have to take place? Is it broken down to enough detail to expose hidden work? Often it's not until we break it down into detail that we really think through the issue. Okay. Is it based on some written points of reference? Is it approved by the person who will actually do the work? Is the person who's actually going to be responsible, if they looked at this and agreed to it? And is it assuming reasonable levels of productivity? But it's really this next one that I want to focus some particular attention on as well. Does the estimate include a range? Does it include a best case and a worst case? It may be a most likely case, kind of the mode. Is the worst case, you really thought it through as the worst case, and have the assumptions going to the worst case been documented, going into the best case, right? Another question is, the situation changed since this estimate was put together? Important questions. So, the favored way of giving estimates, quantitative estimates, for many projects is what's called decomposition. And basically, the idea is simple. That it's very easy when we have a fuzzy idea of what we're talking about to give a equally inaccurate estimate. But if we start thinking in very specific terms about exactly what's required as the subpieces, it's less easy to fool ourselves. So decomposition involves systematically breaking down what we're talking about into pieces. And then for each of the pieces, we calculate what's required for that piece, and we get an estimate for the overall components. So there's a couple reasons for this. Number one, you have a clear conceptualization of what's required. You've really thought through what's needed. But the other thing is that if you make mistakes, the errors are likely to cancel, or they're more likely to cancel, because you make mistakes for each of those subpieces, and they may be in opposite directions. Some will overestimate, some will underestimate, and as a result, we'll get an estimate which is less far off. Okay, so the idea here is that maybe this is for a sprint, maybe it's for a longer time, but we have a set of features. We estimate some staff weeks to complete each, and then we measure some actual effort. And we may get some cases where these are quite specific, detailed ideas for the features, and we'll get some estimate. And hopefully the estimate is off in different directions. So sometimes we overestimate, sometimes we underestimate. With small pieces of work, it's likely to be much less off as a whole for the whole thing once we total these up than it would be if we had estimated all at once. We think through each item, and part of the reason for that is on some of these we might be overestimating. We say 2 hours, it's actually 1 hour, what have you. And in other cases, it's the reverse. I did see for some of your estimates, there were a few that were underestimates, or excuse me, overestimates. Okay, now, it's a nice idea. Break it down into pieces, and we think concretely about those pieces, and we have errors that cancel. There's a couple problems here. One is that we're overly optimistic in general. We tend to give best case estimates. I mean, that's really the truth. I hate to say it, but we're terrible at estimates as software engineers. We tend to give the best case. We tend to think through, like, sort of the typical case we expect, and we don't think about the inconvenient things that can happen. So we end up essentially giving something close to the best case. Client pressure, as I've noted, and pride pushes towards smaller numbers. So one way to deal with this that I'll be advocating is range estimates. So you give 90% confidence intervals or what have you. But then there's a second issue here. This is very testable, so it's good to note these are two different issues. One is we're overly optimistic. Another is that even when we give ranges, they're too narrow. Which is what happened on Tuesday, right? I asked you to give ranges and they were too narrow. If they hadn't been too narrow, if they'd been on the ball, most people would have gotten around 90% of the actual numbers falling in their ranges. But instead it was more like 2 or 3 being most common. 4 also had some. And what that's suggesting is that those intervals are too narrow. They're not really reflecting the uncertainty that's there and your lack of knowledge sufficiently. So here, even with ranges, we're going to need a way of adjusting them. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to provide a little bit of guidance on a best practice for doing this. I am not going to hold you for your exam responsible for all the details of this. Okay? Time is too short for me to present it in detail. But I want to give you a flavor of one practice that other companies have used successfully to deal with this. Okay. So the first issue to avoid is avoid point estimates. This is maybe the single biggest message from this lecture. And I'm not going to hold you responsible for the quantitative technique I'm going to be presenting, but I certainly will want you to learn overall principles like this. Avoid point estimate. If your manager asks you for an estimate, don't give a number. You give a range. And that range tells them something about your uncertainty as well, or confidence about the answer. Okay. So point estimates hide uncertainty, and push to give a single number, they'll tend to give the best case. Okay. So instead, we consciously think through worst case, best case. We force ourselves to do this. Okay. So range estimates make explicit, and by making explicit, they require us to think it through explicitly. How broad is our uncertainty? Okay. Why do we do that? Well, makes it less likely developers will accidentally substitute in a best case, just reflexively. They'll put in their best case estimate without thinking it through the uncertainties. But it also gives the client or your manager important information regarding that uncertainty. And sometimes what happens, this is a very important point, often what happens, if they say, wow, that's really big uncertainty, you're telling me you don't know if you can do that in 2 weeks or 2 months, they'll say, what do you need to narrow that down? And that gets the discussion going in a productive way. You say, okay, look, if we took 3 days, we could do a spike prototype that would help really pin down whether this is likely to be 2 weeks or 2 months, something closer to 2 weeks or 2 months. But we do need those couple days of investment to figure out, how long it's going to take. So that's a useful discussion, how to reduce that uncertainty. And a range estimate can get that discussion going. Often clients are not delighted to see a wide estimate, but you harness that to let them give you the ability to narrow it down. Okay? Another way to narrow it down, you say, well, look, there's someone else in the company that has a lot of experience with Angular 2. And if we could borrow that person for a week, we could give you a better estimate. Or, if we went with this other technology that has a license fee, but it's known to be more reliable, that would probably narrow our estimate a lot. It gets that discussion going. And then finally, it decreases the risk that an estimate will be mistaken for a commitment. How do you commit to a range? Well, just that it's somewhere in the range. Whereas if you give a single number, the client may say, oh, okay, so you're committing to that, you'll deliver it by then, which is often what you don't want to do. Okay. Okay. So here's an example of a range estimate. Okay. Features here. Again, this is from Software Estimation by McConnell. Best case here on the left, worst case on the right, where these are described as like only 25% chance it's less than the best case, only 25% chance it's higher than the worst case. We'll see that those change a lot, whether it's 25%, 75. I'd recommend higher numbers than 75, for example, and lower than 25, so that there's less chance it's below the best case. And then you have a most likely case. And then you have a mean, okay, a sort of expected case, the average case, okay. Turns out we're going to derive these from these, okay. Okay, so range estimates are really good. They let us secure these benefits. They'll often get the discussion going about reducing uncertainty, makes it less likely that developers will give a best case reflexively for the expected case, and less likely that people will assume a commitment. But there are some gotchas. One issue is that if you have range estimates for the pieces, you can't just total up the best cases and say that's the best case for the whole project, or total up the worst cases and say that's the worst case for the whole swack of them. It doesn't work that way statistically. Okay. Secondly, we underestimate the width of the intervals. We think they're 95% or 90% intervals, and they're actually 30%. We saw that Tuesday. Right? Sometimes clients react emotionally to a wide range of uncertainties. I would say this is silver lining. You take that adverse reaction and you turn it into, okay, let's narrow that uncertainty for you. You need to give us this to allow us to do that. And then if you don't specify the assumptions that went into it, you've missed a big opportunity here. Okay. So suggestion that comes from some parts of the literature and industry, I believe, is this issue of, okay, give a worst case, best case, and most likely case, and then we'll derive an expected case using some statistical assumptions. So here, it says specify a best case that's like 3 standard deviations out. It's very unlikely it's more than that, and a worst case that's 3 standard deviations out on the upper side of how long it could take. You think it's less than 1% chance that it will take more than that. And then a sort of best guess is to the single most likely value, if you have to put an estimate on that, okay? And then we'll derive an expected case. We'll see one way of doing that, okay? That's going to count for skew here. Okay, so the issue here, the first issue I want to deal with, and I'm whipping through this closely just so you can see these high-level understanding, is that statistical care is needed to go from the subpiece estimates to the overall range. So you can't just say the best case for the whole project is totaling up the best cases for the pieces. or for worst case. Why can't you say that? Why can't you say, well, if each piece has a worst case of x sub I, and total up the x sub i's to get the total for the whole project, that's our worst case for the whole project. Why is that? Why is that problematic?
This is integration.
Well, it's not so much an integration issue, although I could interpret that at a mathematical level. Integration in a mathematical sense too. But the issue is that it's very unlikely you'll simultaneously be off below the worst case of every single one of those. And so if you're looking for a realistic chance of the worst case for the whole thing, it's that is unlikely to come for just a situation assuming the only way to get to that is by each of the subpieces being off. Instead, there's, for the whole thing, there's a chance of less than 1%, that it's less than something that that thing does not require all the worst cases to be best off. And similarly, the best case is not going to be given by the sum of the best cases because it's vanishingly unlikely that each of those will be off, okay? More likely to be off in some, the worst case, not for others. And you'll still get a worst and best case for the whole project that is less extreme than you would think with the sum of the best cases, okay? So the suggested approach here is to basically total up the expected values for each subpiece and then derive the variance as the sum of the variance for each of the pieces, okay, which does assume independence. So the idea here is, look, we have each of these features. We have a worst case and a best case for each of those. And we will derive a standard deviation from a formula we'll be given in a minute for that. And by taking the square root of that, the square of it, we arrive at a variance. And then we'll sum up the variance of each of the pieces to get a variance for the whole, okay? The idea here is that we want a best case for the whole thing, all these features, that is quantified statistically what's sort of the worst case for that, and it's going to be far less far out than summing up the worst cases would suggest, okay? Okay. So the idea here is that for the best and the worst case, we estimate the best and the worst in the most likely case. And the traditional assumption that's made, and it's made in part because we have skew possible, is to assume a beta distribution to derive the expected value, okay? And there's two formulas for doing this, but basically if you have a worst and a best case and most likely case, you can arrive at an estimate for the expected case, the mean, okay, using the formula like that. And some people will use a conservative formula that provides an expected case that takes somewhat longer. Others will use this traditional formula. But the point is we give best, worst, most likely, and we get out an expected, okay, the expected case. So we give these and we get out this, okay, which is the mean. And totaling up the means gives us a total for all of them together. It's the sum of those, okay? That's the mean. However, we need to go now and compute the variance of each of these pieces, okay? And the challenge for this is that we tend to underestimate our intervals. Our best and worst cases are probably not nearly as wide as they should be. That's the truth, for each piece. We're just overly optimistic. So we far underestimate the width of intervals. So what companies have done here, companies that are serious about this sort of approach to estimation, what they'll sometimes do is basically say, okay, how bad are we based on our historic data? And I know from your projects, quantify how, I don't like to put it, but how bad are you at estimation? And we figure out, okay, if I ask you for a 90% range, are you giving me a 90% range? 90% of the time the true value falls in there, or is it more like a 30% range? Or is it a 20% range? And the deal is that I can correct for it. So if it turns out it's a 30% range, then basically I can account for that fact and put in an appropriate adjustment. Okay, so the idea is here, I have a worst case and a best case that you give me, and I say, well, maybe. That's what you're telling me, but I know from your past estimates that you actually tend to be too narrow in your estimates. So you put in this correction factor, okay? And we use that to derive a standard deviation, actually variance here. Excuse me, standard deviation here, and then we'll square it to get the variance, and then we'll sum that up. So this is a standard deviation here. And we calculate this with a best case and worst case, you tell me, and then a correction factor based on your historic information. So here, you'll notice on this left-hand side, it says, if this percentage of your actual outcomes fall within your best-worst estimate range. So let's suppose that 30% of the time, the true answer falls within your range, which is pretty much what we saw last time for many of you. Got about 3 out of those 10 falling in that range. Then we'd have in the denominator this correction factor be 0.77, okay? So you give me a worst and best case, I plug in the correction factor, and I get out a standard deviation, which I can then use for that particular feature, okay? So that's how I calculate this, and then I square it to get the variance, and then, assuming independence, which is a strong assumption, I total these up to get a variance for the whole. Remember, the variance, how does the variance relate to the standard deviation? Anyone remember? Speak as in one voice.
Variance is the square.
It's a square, yeah, you just square it. So 0.233 squared is 0.154. 0.367 squared is 0.134. And so then you square these. You square each of these and you sum them up. And that reflects the fact that if we have a situation where we have a set of independent draws, each of which has a certain variance associated with them, the variance of the sum is the sum of the variances. Maybe you don't remember that, but it's a useful factoid sometimes, okay? So this is the sum of these variances. It's for the whole shebang. It's for all of these. If they're independent. If they're independent. We already derived here, the mean is the sum of these means. Okay? That is true regardless of whether they're independent or not. But for variance, it assumes their independence. And I might ask you about that on the exam. This is assuming independence. Yes?
So how practical is that? Like, I feel like usually features are dependent on each other.
They are. They are. And in fact, I make a comment. Where's my comment here? They are dependent. And they're dependent on each other in a way that's... I had a comment on that somewhere here. The basic deal is something that actually may make you off with respect to this one, that if you've underestimated feature 1, chances are in many cases you've underestimated feature 2 and feature 3. Because maybe the reason feature 1 has been underestimated is because this technology that you're using is flaky. And you're using that technology for feature 2, feature 3 as well. And it's flaky there as well. Or maybe, it's a new software developer and they're slow in coming up to speed on some pieces of this. And if they're slow in feature 1, they might be slow in some other features too. The point is that you're absolutely right, Tushita, that assuming independence is, as I said, that's a strong assumption. better than just guessing. But, and this is one of the reasons that you might use a conservative estimate, for example, here, rather than the traditional estimate. But you're right that it's problematic statistically. There are more sophisticated ways you could do that would not assume independence, and you could look at the covariance sometimes between different subpieces and use that to try to provide some corrections. Okay, and so then, having done that, and I've got to finish up here. Again, I'm not keeping you responsible for all of this, but I want you to know that there is methodology that people have used for this. If you have this variance, and you can get this for the whole project, you could take the standard deviation for the whole project, and you could basically get best and worst case estimates for the whole project, take into account the standard deviation that you've computed for the project as a whole. Okay, so a lot of work to try to arrive at this statistically, to derive best and worst case estimates for the whole project based on best and worst case estimates for these subpieces. But maybe you never apply this. And you know, I think realistically probably people in the room won't apply it. There's still some important take-home messages. Do not give a point estimate, if at all possible. It can be taken as a commitment. It doesn't communicate your uncertainty in a way that could be useful for starting that discussion. Try to provide best, worst case estimates, maybe most likely estimate, and try to use that to communicate to others what sort of range of uncertainty you're talking about. And very importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we have to be guarded because we're poor at estimation, and it's worth keeping track of what was our estimate in the actual time to get some sense of how far off we are so we can do some measure of correction. You saw one approach, but the fact is we want to be aware if we're falling short in this area. Don't let a target turn into an estimate, or a guess turn into an estimate. An estimate is something different. A target is aspirational. An estimate is grounded, where a guess is a. And one of the best ways to do this is to think through the pieces. Okay, resist the pressure to set them optimistically. Recognize it is political, and use range estimates so that you don't just give one estimate for the project as a whole. So that's all for today. Thank you very much for your patience. I know this is dry material, but these are take-home messages that are very practical, putting aside the details of the quantitative components. Thanks very much, and I will look forward to the next deliverable here.